Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think probably a lot of people are still standing in line at the lunch line downstairs, so I suspect that throughout the session a few people will continue to come trickling in. But welcome to this session. It probably is the session with the longest title, but in a nutshell, this is about basically getting people from AppV 4.6 to 5.0 and understanding what that migration entails. And along the way, what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about some of the technologies in AppV 5 that are a part of that consideration. Before we get started, there are a couple colleagues of mine who are passing out surveys. We're doing basically some all-up MDOT planning for next calendar year. And so if you've got any feedback or you want any kind of input, please raise your hands and complete these surveys. Basically, we'll take the surveys back and we'll look at them both from an engineering point of view and from a marketing point of view, and then incorporate that feedback into MDOT all up. So basically all the products in MDOT for the next calendar year. So welcome, my name is Matthijs Gates. I'm a program manager on the AppV team. I've been on the AppV team about 5 years now. Before that, I was, for the most part, a developer on Windows, and I've been at Microsoft for quite a few years. The AppV team we're located in Boston, so one of the things that I did when I moved to the AppV team is I moved out to Boston. So that makes it a little bit unusual, and of course, the team came to Microsoft via the acquisition in 2006 of Softricity. And there are still quite a few people actually who worked at Softricity on the team. But that makes us a little bit unusual at Microsoft in that we're a fully fledged engineering team that's not located in Redmond. The other thing that I'll quickly mention is if you have any questions, we're going to have some time at the end of the session for questions, and if your questions don't get answered or you don't have a chance to ask the questions, by all means, come on up and we can chat for a few minutes at the end. I'm happy to talk to whoever wants to spend a few minutes after this. Okay, so what are we going to talk about in this talk? One of the big reasons why we put this talk in place is because for those of you who know AppV 4.6 and have looked at AppV 5, you're aware that that's a pretty big step. And I'm curious, how many people have deployed AppV 4.6? Okay, and how many people have looked at AppV 5? A few. Anyone deployed it? Okay, a few hands. So what we're hoping is that over the next year or so, the number of hands kind of shifts over to more people who've deployed AppV 5 from 4.6. But the feedback that we've gotten from our customers is that transition is it's fairly complicated. And what we did is when we released AppV 5, we released two technologies that we thought would be helpful in that migration. One is the package converter, and the other is what we call client coexistence. But the mistake that we made is that we didn't actually put out enough documentation. We made the technologies available, and people found them and kind of thought, okay, I'll do this. I'll convert all the packages and then move over to 5.0. And that is a fairly complicated process. So part of what this session is about are some of the considerations. A lot of people are uneasy because they don't know what should they be worried about in making that migration. And so we'll talk about that today. The other thing that I'll say is that over this summer, you're going to see some blogs actually from the core engineering team that are going to be related to best practices, considerations, things like tips and tricks and so forth. Because what we really want to do is, it's a holistic process that encompasses all these technologies, And then if you know what the gotchas are, it actually makes the whole process so that you can understand it end to end. It's not necessarily turnkey. It's still fairly involved. But at least then you'll have a good idea. You have a good idea of the scope of the project. So, like I said, we're going to use the package converter. In some cases, you're going to sequence. In some cases, you'll do both. We'll talk about that. And then the coexistence, actually, a lot of people don't quite understand that. And I think coexistence actually is what makes the migration process fairly straightforward in that you can make it a migration versus a cutover. And I'm going to assume that people have a basic kind of understanding of AppV concepts. So let's talk a little bit, just for a couple minutes, about AppV5. You know, what did we do in AppV5? What are some of the pillars? And so there are 3 pillars that we really focused on. What we call integrated platform, flexible virtualization, and modern management. And what do those mean? So integrated platform, what that really means is that you can dial the isolation of the package from having it be fully isolated to not fully isolated. So the history of AppV4, actually AppV, goes back to RDSH machines where people were having a heck of a time taking apps that were, in some cases, incompatible and putting them on RDS machines. And so what they could do is that the full isolation was actually tremendously helpful in that situation. But in a desktop deployment, you may not actually want that isolation. So for example, with the Office package that we released for Office 2010, we spent quite a bit of time writing these plugins that allowed the Office package to integrate with desktop search, for example, or SharePoint integration on IE, and that type of thing. So in that situation, you have a package that you deploy that you actually want it to integrate with the system. So we took some of those learnings, actually, and incorporated them into AppV5, and we feel like we've got a good platform that we can build on going forward. Flexible virtualization is mostly around 2 technologies. Virtual application extension, which you can think of FTAs and shortcuts as special cases, and connection groups, which are dynamic suite composition. So you take 2 different packages and you combine them at runtime in the same virtual environment. So what connection groups allow you to do is they allow you to service the packages on their own life cycle, but combine them. So you could have a Java runtime package that you'd put in several connection groups with, let's say you had 10 Java apps, you could put it in each one of those Java app connection groups. So then you could service the runtime without having to resequence or service the Java apps. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And then the last thing is the modern management, which is basically web-based UI and PowerShell as opposed to SFT MIME and an MMC snap-in. Okay, so those are kind of the big concepts. So let's talk about some of the specifics of what we did from 4.6 to 5.0. So in 4.6, we had a Q drive. So we had a proprietary file format that we put all the packages in a Q drive. And the feedback we got from customers is it's really hard to figure out, which drive is available, especially in a large enterprise. They might end up creating several different packages because one department had the Q drive and another one didn't, and so forth. So it was very challenging. And in AppV5, you don't have a Q drive anymore. So we use NTFS natively. You basically take the package, you put it right on your drive, and you can take a look at it. So this was a big win. Okay, the other thing we did is in AppV4.6, the packages had a 4 gigabyte size limit. This actually it seems pretty big, but people were actually running into this in quite a bit, especially when you start thinking of apps like AutoCAD and some of these large apps. So what we did is we redid the file format so that we actually don't have that 4 gigabyte size limit. It's not infinite, but we shouldn't actually run into a size limitation going forward. Isolated versus virtual application extension, we talked about that just a minute ago. Dynamic suite composition versus virtual application connection. Again, the big thing there, people like the notion of dynamic suite composition, but it was actually fairly challenging to manage. And the connection groups, basically, it's a separate XML document that just lists the packages that go into that virtual environment. The other thing that connection groups support are app to app. So in other words, you could have 2 apps that you put in the same connection group, whereas in 4.6, it was only apps with middleware or apps with plugins. You couldn't do app to app. We had a shared cache in for VDI and RDS. So this was where you had maybe 1,000 clients all sharing the same golden image. And what the feedback that we got from customers was that this was very difficult actually to manage. And so we went to something called shared content store. It's the same concept, but in this case, the management workflows are actually identical to what they are for the non-shared content store. So from the admin point of view, it's just you configure the client and then you just manage it, and you might be managing a mix of clients that are operating in this mode and not operating in that mode. And from the management workflow, it's completely transparent. We had SFT MIME in App v4.6. We've got PowerShell now on the sequencer, on the client, and on the server. And we had an MMC snap-in on 4.6. And on App v5, we went to a web-based management system. So let's talk about the migration workflow. So what does the big picture look like? So in this particular diagram, what I have, I've got 2 AppV servers, but they're not necessary components. So in other words, you could use SCCM or third-party ESD or standalone. But what you're going to do is you're going to take your 4.6 package, run it through the converter, and stage it on a server somewhere for deployment. And this can be an App v5 server. It might be SCCM. Like I said, it's compatible with other technologies. Now, on the client, you're going to install 4.6 SP2 alongside App v5. And those 2 versions of App v can coexist. And they work together so that you can deploy a 4.6 package and then basically transition it over by publishing it out from the App v5 server. When you push it out to the client, it actually takes over the extension points from the 4.6 package. From the user's point of view, it's completely transparent. So they're using an app, and they're using App v4.6. At some point, you've pushed this out, and it's now App v5. So like I said, it's transparent. You can roll back. So if you pull back, let's say you push it out and something happened. Maybe there's an incompatibility of some sort that you didn't catch in your testing. You can pull it back and it'll revert back to the 4.6. So the coexistence really is how you manage the risk of that migration. All right, so let's talk about package conversion. So again, package conversion is taking an App v 4.5 and beyond package and converting it to App v5. It's one tool that we have. It's a command line tool that installs with the sequencer, and we're going to use it in our demo, that just takes these packages and it handles batch conversions. But I will highlight that it's not necessarily a turnkey operation. So there are considerations that you need to have. So for example, if you have scripts in your OSDs, those won't get automatically converted. if you have environment variables that are different per OSD within a particular specific 4.6 package, those won't get converted either. So what we've tried to do is have verbose warnings with actionable messages that actually allow you to test the packages, see what can and can't work, and then make the conversion. So basically, when you install the sequencer, the package converter comes down with it. The sequencer also, you can also use PowerShell to drive that, or the traditional the UI, basically the workflow. And in 5.0 we did not change that workflow very much at all. So obviously the output of the sequencer is in a different file format, but it's still, you still sequence, you configure primary feature block and so forth. Now the package converter is just, it's a tool that either converts or it doesn't convert. You don't actually tweak the package. What you can do though is that you can take your package and convert it and then open it up for upgrade in the sequencer to get the new extension points. Because obviously the extension points that exist in 4.6 have been augmented in 5.0, and if you just convert the 4.6 package, you don't get the new extension points. All right, so we're going to use PowerShell, and this is just a reminder. PowerShell uses verbs and nouns. So we're going to test a legacy package, and then we're going to convert the legacy package. Okay. So what I have here is I've got just a standard Windows 8 machine. Now this is a 64-bit OS. Now the package converter is x86, so when you run it in PowerShell, make sure that you launch the 32-bit version of PowerShell. So I've looked up the commands here, right? We've got two commands out of the package converter. We've got convert from and test. So those two basically, what you do is you're going to test the package to see, will this work from 4.6 to 5.0? If it does, then you convert it. And the converter will also perform the same test, but it will, like I said, it'll keep going if it does run into a problem. Okay, so let's look at the package that we're gonna convert. So this is just a standard AppV 4.6 package. Most of you know the format. There's the SFT file that has all the files and the registry content in there. We've got a bunch of OSDs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test the package. So what test does is basically it looks at the package, looks at all the OSD files, and is going to either give you an error or it's going to tell you, yep, this is actually it's a good package. So you can see there were no warnings, there were no errors either, and the information says that there are no major errors or warnings, and it's a good candidate for conversion. Now, one thing that I'll stress is if we convert it, we still have to test it. So that's part of the workflow. You don't want to convert the package and push it out blindly, assuming that it converts okay. But let's look at one package that so this particular package has an error. So this is what that looks like. So in this here you can see we got an error. It says that the package is targeted for an unsupported operating system. So AppV5 runs on Win 7 and beyond, or 2K with Server 2008 R2 and beyond. This particular package was aimed at Vista. So we detected that and said, basically failed the package, said, no, it won't work on that operating system because AppV5 doesn't work on that operating system. So you definitely want to pay attention to the messages. So let's go ahead and convert the first one. Do this. So what it does is that it's cracking the SFT file and extracting the file content, the registry content, all the metadata, and then producing one of these new files. And once it completes, we'll take a look at what the new content looks like. So this went to new. So the converter put out 4 packages here. This is the main one. This is a .appv file, the installer. And then there are two XML files that came with this called the dynamic deployment config file and the dynamic user config file. And we'll talk about those in a minute, but those basically allow you to tweak the package's virtual environment when you deploy it. Now, the nice thing is that this is a standard file format. So if we go and look at this, what we can do is we can rename this file. It's a zip-based format, which now we don't need a special piece of software to go and actually look at the contents of this file. So if you look at the root of this file, and this is actually what gets deployed to the client, and then on the client, basically that appv file gets exploded onto the client in the package store. So you can see that there's a bunch of metadata. We've got stream map, which is used by the streaming engine to know what to bring down. There's also the registry.dat file. This is a standard registry format file. So what you can do is you can take this file and you could actually load it in regedit and then browse its content. So this allows you, because these are standard formats, they allow you to use any of the tools that exist out there that can handle these. Now, one thing that I'll caution is that you can look at this file by renaming it to a zip and browsing its content, but you can't actually create a file. So let's say you wanted to add a file to this or edit its content. You can't do that. And the reason for that is especially the stream map file, which actually tells the streaming engine where the files are inside of the format. So there's some metadata that has to exist in this container that has to be configured correctly so that our streaming engine and our client know to interpret it correctly. But you can always take a look at it. So these are basically the metadata. If we look in the root, you can see that we've installed it to a particular root. You've got all the DLLs in here. Now, if we look, we have under VFS, this is a virtual file system. So once this package is deployed to a client, our virtual file system it's a layer that basically exists between the app and Windows. And it will blend what we call blend namespaces. So if you take a look at these are folder IDs. So what it will do is that if from within the virtual environment, you do a directory listing of, in this particular case, program files x86, you're going to see a combination of what's in the package and what's on the system. So basically, those two namespaces get blended on the client, and that's why you can take these images and push them out. And there's a bunch of other content in here as well. So let's go ahead and delete this. So let's talk just for a minute about batch operations. So what we could do is there are a number of packages in here, and I can just specify a wildcard. And what it will do is that it will go through and look at all the directories in there and give me a report as to which ones are good and which ones aren't. So what this means, for example, is that if you've got hundreds or even thousands of packages, you can basically run this over the weekend, and it will give you an idea as to which ones are good candidates and which ones aren't. Now, if we scroll up here, one of these had an error. This one, the Adobe Reader, and that's the same error that we saw earlier. Now, the key thing here is that it didn't encounter an error and stop. It basically encountered an error and kept going. And again, the goal for this is that you can run this over many packages, get a report, and then you can go later on and act on those. And you can do the exact same thing with the convert tool. So we could do a convert wildcard and convert an entire subdirectory or tree. It'll basically recurse down into the tree of all the SFT files within a directory structure. Okay. Let me just set this up. Okay. So what we just talked about we talked about the testing. So this is one part. And again, these slides mostly are here so that you've then got them in the deck and you can start playing around with this. So you can either specify wildcards, you can specify, you can actually put multiple packages. You know, this is just standard PowerShell syntax for you. There's a convert step as well. The key thing here is that you can do a batch convert. It doesn't stop on errors. It keeps going. Make sure that you read the warnings and errors. Again, we've tried to make those very, very verbose, and we will, if possible, we will fail the package conversion if we're not sure about what the right package would be. So anytime there's any kind of ambiguity, it will stop. All right, just in terms of kind of a high-level checklist, the package has to be 4.5 and above. It has to be able to open up in the 4.6 sequencer, okay? And most 4.5 packages can open up in the 4.6 sequencer. And it has to be able to run on the AppV 4.6 client. So, I mean, they're pretty basic. And then there are some additional kind of considerations, right, in this. And I've listed a few of them here. Like I said, look for some blog posts over the course of the summer from the core engineering team that will provide a more definitive listing of gotchas in that. But I'll just talk about these just for a second. So for example, if you have scripts in the OSDs, those will not get converted. You need to pull them out and then put them in either the dynamic deployment configuration file or the dynamic user configuration file. If you've got registry settings in the OSDs, again, those will not get converted. You need to do those manually. Environment variables are the same thing. And if you've got packages that are suited together, so in dynamic suite composition, when you take two packages and you suite them together, you need to actually modify one of the packages to say these are suited together. With connection groups, that's separate. You no longer touch the packages. You author a new XML document, actually, that just lists the packages in the connection group. And if you go to, there's another session late this afternoon on Office in AppV, and Matt will talk. He shows one of the connection groups, so that'll give you a better idea also specifically as to how those work. Okay, let's talk about one of the new things that we introduced with AppV5, dynamic configuration. So what dynamic configuration allows you to do is have an AppV5 package that's been packaged and modify its virtual environment, so its runtime environment. And you can do it for all the users on a machine. You can do it per user. But it makes it very simple to produce one package but deploy it many ways. So for example, some people have a specific update cadence. So if they let's say they want to modify a package for all users, but they don't want to send it to, they might have, I don't know, it might be a fairly involved process to actually update the package. As an admin, you can go in and actually edit the dynamic deployment config, push that out, and that'll allow you to make small tweaks in the package. So for example, you can define environment variables, or you can make registry tweaks. There are a number of things. We'll take a look at these files in a second. But the key thing here is that you sequence once and you can deploy it many ways. All right, so let's just talk, be a little bit more specific. So via dynamic deployment config files or user config, you can enable or disable entire subsystems. And what do I mean by subsystem? I mean shortcuts, FTAs, and there are a number of them actually that we now support, COM servers, that kind of thing. So you can very easily then in the XML file say, all right, I want to push this package out, but I don't want any FTAs to exist for this. And so you just basically toggle one switch, and it just disables the entire subsystem when it gets pushed out. So it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. There are two different types. There's one that's called a deployment config file, and there's one that's called a user config file. And the deployment config file is meant for all the users on that machine. So if it's an RDS machine, for example, you push it out, you make a change in the deployment config, it'll affect all the users on the machine. If you want it to just be for a particular user, then you push out a tweaked user config file that's for that user. And you can combine them, but the granularity is by subsystem. So you can't make some tweaks to the shortcut subsystem in the deployment config, make some more tweaks in the shortcut subsystem in the user config, and then have them overlay correctly. So it's either all shortcuts in the deployment config or all shortcuts in the user config. All right, and again, the big plus here is that you don't need to update the package. So these are some of the specific extension points that we introduced in 5.0. So everyone here is familiar with the FTAs and shortcuts in App v4.6. And think of those as a virtual package that's registering itself on the local system so that native apps and other virtual apps can see it, right? So FTAs and shortcuts, it's like you see it in your start menu. There's nothing kind of, magical about that. What we did is, this was actually quite a bit of learning that we got from the Office 2010 package. We thought, wow, there are lots of extension points that Windows has that we'd like these apps to be able to register their capabilities with. So the first two on this list already exist in 4.6. The rest of them are new to 5.0. And the other thing is, underneath the covers, what we did is we made it so that it's fairly straightforward to add these subsystems. So we can continue to build and add on as we get more and more feedback from customers as to what they want. They want this particular subsystem to be supported. We can go in and make a tweak, and then in the next release we can enable that. So whereas before FTAs and shortcuts were enabled in completely different ways. Now the big thing on this particular list are the COM local servers. So these are XEs that are registered via the COM subsystem and the local system. So what this means is that any kind of a native app or another virtual app, when it enumerates the COM servers, it can find those and instantiate them and use them. Okay, now these are local COM servers at this point. So these are executables that run in their own process. All right, let's move to our next demo. All right, so so the scenario here is that we've managed to convert Adobe Reader 11. Now, if you take a look at that, remember we put out the sequencer or the converter puts out two matched files to that package. So there's a deployment config and a user config. So you don't have to go through and kind of figure out what subsystems are supported and what shortcuts exist in FTAs and so forth. When that package is produced and these two files are come out, they're matched to the package that actually is produced. So what you can do then, if you want to make some changes, you take those existing files and actually make small tweaks in them to push it out. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take a look at, first off, let's take a look at the deployment config. So this gives you an idea as to the contents. Now, you've got a user configuration section and a machine configuration section. If you look in the user config file, you're going to see the user config. You're not going to see anything that could actually be used to update machine-wide content. And then this file in general, it's organized by subsystem. So in this particular case, we've got the shortcuts. We've got file type associations, URL protocols, and so forth. So, and the way that you would disable them is you would just, for example, if you want to disable all shortcuts for a particular package, you would just set this to false and then push it out with that package. Then the user would get no shortcuts, but they'd get FTAs. All right, so let's take a look at this. And what we're going to do is we're going to push out this package. First off, it'll be just normal. It'll take over FTAs and so on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to push it out so that it doesn't take over the PDF file type. And you'll see how that's done. So I've got the client here. So we've got a number of commands here. And our client UI actually sits on top of these and uses them. But you have a lot of power that you can use with these. So we're going to add the app-v client package. So I'm just going to specify the path to the app-v file. And just like in 4.6, where you add and then you still have to publish, in 5.0 you still have to add and you still have to publish. So those concepts are the same. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pipe the output of this command, which is going to be a package ID and a version ID, and I'm just going to publish them to myself in this particular case. All right, so if we take a look here, you can see that I've got a shortcut now here, and if I double-click this PDF, it will go through and load the primary feature block. And just like when we were looking at the contents of that app-v file, what the client is doing now in the streaming engine is that they're actually taking the contents of that package and putting it down on the local system. And you can take a look. It's like there's no more Q drive. It's just the C drive in that particular case. Now, one tip here is that you may want to go and take a look and see what's running. So if I look, for example, well, this one right here, this actually tells you that there's a package ID. This is the package ID. So again, that's the lineage. The state is associated with the lineage. There's a version ID. So a lot of the concepts are the same from 4.6. But what I can do is we can see which packages have been added to the machine. And you can see that currently it's 45% of it is running. And you also can see that it's in use. But let's say that we wanted to see what are all the virtual processes that are running on the machine right now. So we could run this command, and it looks like this one launched 3 different virtual processes. But there's actually, what we can really do is use PowerShell and actually get some of the capabilities that it has. So we can expand that property. And now what we got is, we actually got, it's the same 3 processes, but we got a little bit more useful information. Now, so we got, for example, that the particular user SID is this one. And you'll see here also there's a virtual environment and there's a package. And both of these have an ID and a version. Now, in this particular case, these are the same. But if I had taken this package and was actually running it in a connection group, the package ID and the version ID would be different because that package now would be running inside a particular connection group, which has its own version. So, all right, so let's go ahead and take this, actually remove this package. Let me shut it down. And I'm going to remove this. All right, so if we take a look here, we're back to where we started. If we double-click this, it basically takes us into the modern app experience. So basically, everything has been reverted. Now, what we want to do is we're going to use. So we're not going to use the default user config. We're going to use this one, the no PDF user config. Let's take a look at those. What the difference is. So we went from that one to the no PDF one. So if you take a look at this, basically what WinDiff does is it just compares those 2 files, tells you what the differences are. Now, in this particular case, the entire file type association subsystem has been turned off. But if you wanted to be more surgical in this, what you could do is actually come down here and remove it just for the PDF files. So you have a lot of flexibility that you can work with here. So let's go ahead and push this out. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to specify a path to that no PDF file. Okay, so this one. All right, let's take a look at what happened here. So you can see the icon is still what it was before. We can launch this. We can double-click this. It takes us into the modern app experience. This is continuing to launch. If we look at this, what we can do is we can take that PDF file and we can still open it. But basically with that one small modification, it gives you an idea as to what you can do with these user config files and the deployment config file. And because this is a user config file, you can target it at a specific user. Even if this is an RDS machine, for example, and you've got 10 different users using it, you might want one user to not have the FTAs and all the other users to have the FTAs. You have that level, that degree of granularity. All right. Let's Okay. So there are two types, just to kind of summarize on this. There are two types of dynamic configuration files. There's the deployment config and the user config. Deployment config is machine-wide, all users. The user config is per user. You specify the deployment config when you add the package, because it's global. And you specify the user config when you publish the package, because it's per user or groups of users. Okay. So let's talk about why would you want to sequence as part of this migration process. Well, one is kind of the obvious one, that the packages don't work on app v4.6. The other one is that you might want that whole list of extension points that did not exist in 4.6. So what you would do is you'd convert the package, and then actually all you have to do, you don't have to resequence it. You just take the package and you open it up for upgrade in the sequencer and save it, and you'll get all the new extension points. Now, when you think about it, the batch process that you have available is, and then you're having to go into the GUI, is kind of complicated. So better would be, how could you do this with PowerShell and actually do this in a very straightforward way? So we're going to take a look at that right now. Okay, so I've got the PowerShell window up and running here. Now in this particular case, this is 64-bit. So the converter is the only one that's x86 only. The sequencer actually is fully 64-bit compliant. So what we wanted to do, if I take a look at this, we produced this deployment config file. If I look at the subsystems, I know that WinZip has an app path subsystem. But if I look at this, actually I don't see it in the listing. So in other words, the converter didn't pick up that subsystem. And so what we would like to do is we'd actually like to get that subsystem supported. And that's just an example. You might have, I don't know, there might be comm servers in there. There might be other extension points that you actually want to support. So what we would like to do is actually use a PowerShell commandlet that will open up the package basically and save it. But you should want to be able to do this in just a fully automated way. So we have to do the sequencer expects an installer, and I'll show you an easy way that we can specify this. Because we don't want to run the installer. We just want to open up the package and save it back out. So I need to create an installer here. And all I'm going to do is specify a command that runs. And actually, all right, now we're going to just come back to the sequencer here, and we're going to update that package. Okay, so that's the package we want to update. We have to specify an installer. And we'll specify a name, have an output path, and basically run this. Now, rather than waiting for this to complete, now it takes a few minutes to complete. I just have a snapshot saved on the other side. So it's very simple. So what you could do is you could convert a whole bunch of packages and then run through and do a package upgrade this way, and then your old packages will have all the new extensions in them that you can then use in 5.0. All right, so this is on the, basically that's that same command completed there. If we take a look here, if we go to, now we're in the new directory. If we go look under WinZip and we look at the deployment config and take a look here, basically we now have the app paths subsystem. So that particular app supported this. Again, other apps may support other subsystems as well. Okay, so that's a very simple way of taking a converted package and then getting all the capabilities that you can in app v5. So there's the package upgrade. Again, I'm just included it here so that you can take a look at it. So let's talk about coexistence. So what is coexistence? And I think coexistence is basically it's how you're going to manage the risk is that on that migration. And it's going to be a gradual process that over time you'll start with a few 5.0 packages, and then you'll gradually get more and more and more packages moved over to 5. And at some point, you won't have any more 4.6 packages. Then you can retire the 4.6 client. But why would you do this? And again, the key thing is it's a migration as opposed to a cutover. One of the key bits of feedback that we got, I don't know how many people here use SCCM versus an app v infrastructure, but customers who were going from an app v infrastructure to an SCCM infrastructure maybe 3-4 years ago, had to make that cutover, and it's a very difficult transition. They really wanted to do it, but the client could only be one or the other, and so we were very aware of those difficulties that they had when we came out with existence or coexistence. It's going to be how you're going to manage your risk, and it just will give you the ability to revert back very easily in case some or all of your users run into issues. And again, it's app v 4.6 SP2. So if you don't have app v 4.6 SP2 deployed, you have to upgrade your clients to 4.6. Now, if we look at the big picture of this, it's a pure client configuration. Okay, you don't have to do anything on the server. You don't have to do anything in any other place. It all happens on the client. So the client has to be in what we call migration mode, and the packages have to be converted. We'll talk about that in just a second. But you can use it with any type of an infrastructure that you have. All right, so let's take a look at So what we're going to do is we're going to add a 4.6 package to this machine, and then we're going to upgrade it to 5.0, and you'll see basically how this works. So I'm going to use sftmime for this. Oops. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we add that. We see that this is now 4.6. Basically, this is Word Viewer. If I launch it, it's running, but it's 4.6. So what I would like to do is actually take this package. I've converted it. If we take a look on the machine, I've got the converted package actually right here. And the key from the package that the package has to have in the deployment config, it must have this particular section right here, managing authority package name. So this package name is identical to the 4.6 package name. And then the other key part is that the takeover the extension points from 4.6 is true as well. So the 4.6 client works with the 5.0 client, and basically they orchestrate it correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to step over to a server. So this is just a standard AppV5 server. We no longer manage it via an MMC snap-in. We now manage it from the web. Let's see here, and if I refresh this, it's going to go through, it's going to enumerate any of the packages. We don't have any particular packages right now added on this. And the other thing is that I've got all my packages on the server, and they're going to be coming off of this directory. So they're going to be streaming off of IIS. Now, if we look at the bottom here, here's my new converted word viewer package. I'm just going to copy this path. And now we're going to go and add it. So I can paste it in here. So this path is what's going to get pushed down to the clients, and then the clients are going to, this is where they're going to get the package from. So when we add it, the server performs some basic validation of the package, but we're still going to have to entitle it and then publish it out to our users. Okay, so it's been added. Now if you take a look at it here, it's added, but it's not entitled and published. So let's go ahead and we're going to entitle it, and we're going to entitle it to let's check that out. Go here, we'll grant access. So now you can see it down here. And we could take individuals, we could take anything, basically any AD construct and entitle it to that. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to publish it. Now, the way that AppV5 works with the servers is that there's a management server and a number of publishing servers. And the publishing servers periodically refresh against the management server. Now, by default, that refresh frequency is 10 minutes. So since we're doing a demo, we don't want to wait around for 10 minutes. I've updated that refresh frequency to 10 seconds. I'll show you very quickly what I did here. So if you take a look in regedit, so if you come under Software, Microsoft, AppV, Publishing Service, this interval right here is in seconds. The default is 600. I just set it to 10. What that means is that every 10 seconds, the publishing servers are coming in and checking. So that just means that it'll be made available in a sooner time frame. All right, so let's switch back now to the client. So we've got the client. Something that's actually very handy in AppV5 is that you can actually go connect to a publishing server. And you can see in here, that's my publishing server, the one that we were just on. And by looking at this, I can actually see which packages are entitled and published to me as a user. In this particular case, I've only got one package. But this is really useful if you're troubleshooting. If you're, let's say you're doing a publishing refresh and you're not picking up the apps that you expect, you can go to IE, open up that publishing server and see what's the XML that the server is actually sending down. In this particular case, I can see that this Word Viewer app is actually being published to me. So let's go ahead and add that publishing server. So we're still, remember, this is AppV 4.6, so let's shut down that Word Viewer. So what we're going to do, let me take this. Oops. All right, we're going to, we'll just give it a name. Okay, put that in there. All right, so it added the publishing server, and we can add multiple publishing servers. And the next thing that we're going to do is if we say, okay, there it's listed, we can take and actually pipe that command into and what this does now, it's synchronizing the client. So if we take a look here, now from the user's point of view, we still have the icon, nothing's different. But if we go and launch it, it's now actually coming down from the server. And it runs from AppV5. So we didn't see the progress bar because actually it's a pretty small package. So it actually came up before the progress bar could actually show any progress on it. All right, so that's, I mean, in a very simple way, that's how the publishing works. So what we can do is if we go and we pull it off of there, and we go, so in other words, we use that unpublish it, and okay, so if we go, we now relaunch it from here, and you can actually see that we're back to the 4.6 client. So it's very simple from the user's point of view to get this. All right. Okay, so the coexistence, again, stages your migration. It gives you granular control. So you can push out the 5.0 client next to the 4.6 SP2 client, and then do like application by application, push those out, and then over time, over a period of months possibly, you'll gradually phase over to AppV5. How it does it is basically is answered down below there. It's like it takes over the extension points. There's that managing authority section in the dynamic deployment config. That's the key. Now, if you convert a package, it gets inserted automatically. If you sequence a new package that you want to do this, then you need to go in and add that section manually. But it's fairly straightforward. Actually, the last thing that I'll point out is that migration mode, if you look at the client config on the client, on the AppV5 client, the migration mode has to be set equal to 1. By default, it's 0. So you basically have to configure the clients properly, and then you can push out the packages and gradually move people over to 5. So just before we close, there are a couple different methods that people have been successful in this migration. Both methods actually entail using coexistence. One is that then over time they convert all of their packages and deploy them. So again, it's a gradual phase over to version 5. And then the other method that people have used is they've taken packages that they couldn't sequence in 4.6 and sequence them on 5. For example, if they're running into the 4 gigabyte size limit, they can immediately start taking advantage of some of those capabilities that 5.0 has, sequence those new, and then push those out. And then again, over time, they kind of phase away 4.6 and move over to 5.0. So some of the key takeaways, again, you can convert your 4.6 packages to 5.0. Remember that the coexistence, this is key, and I think, again, it's like this is how you manage the risk, how you make it, you control the whole process. And remember that app v5 is Windows 7 and Server 2008 and beyond. Now, just a key peek as to what's coming next in terms of app v. So Microsoft remains very, very committed to app v. We've gotten actually quite a few questions from people on this, and we invested a lot of time and effort in going to app v5 because we really feel like this is something that we can build on and grow in the coming years. So now you're starting to see some of the fruits actually coming out of this. So the key one here that I'd just like to point out are shell extensions. So this is something that we're going to add in our next release in vNext. I can't talk about a time frame, but what I mean by shell extensions are, for example, if you sequence WinZip and you push it out, you can go on your desktop and right-click and you actually get the WinZip context menus. And there are a number of apps that actually provide these kinds of capabilities. You can actually push out multiple packages, multiple apps, and they can actually they're actually supported. You can have all the shell extensions running in that one same process. So this is another one that we really feel it kind of sets us up for future innovation. Let's see, there are a number of courses, not courses, but breakouts coming up. The one that I'll highlight is the one later on this afternoon that Matt is talking about, and this is app v in Office. The Office tends to be the app that everyone wants to sequence and push out. And we feel that now, with Virtual Application Extension, we can actually integrate it sufficiently into the system that it actually is a really great way to push out Office. So I would encourage you actually to go and attend that talk. And there are a number of other, obviously, MDOP talks that are coming later on in the week. Some resources. Don't forget to complete an evaluation. This talk actually is going to happen again at EMEA, so any feedback that you have actually gets incorporated, and that's the end of that. So we'll take questions now. Does anyone have any questions? Please step up to the mic if you have any. Hi.
We've already deployed app v5 in our environment. We have some coexistence still going on. Mm-hmm. One of our pain points, our biggest pain point, has been with the shortcuts. Yeah. So not all of the shortcuts from 4.6 are being taken over by 5, specifically the ones the user themselves generates. They say, instead of having the start menu, I want it on the desktop. So then they have that extra shortcut. And it doesn't work anymore, even though the app's still there. If they go to the correct place. Do you have any solution for that?
Not at this time. It's the feedback. We've gotten quite a bit of feedback on that. We're still looking at it. It's a difficult problem to solve because they could put those shortcuts basically anywhere. Now maybe it's a question that we'll look in the obvious places like the desktop and a couple other places and not cover it completely. I'm not sure, but it definitely is some feedback that we've gotten.
Thank you.
Okay. So if anyone, you're welcome to come up. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk with you afterwards. And thank you very much.